Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Good morning, Rockingham, and welcome to The Feed. I'm Mike Smith. Today is September 16th, 1 week until the start of fall. We want to wish a happy birthday to Marty. She's gone this week. She's on vacation in the mountains, having a great time, at a well-deserved vacation, well-earned vacation. She's going to be back next week, and for next week, we're going to have the people who are doing the program for the Opera House. They're going to come on and talk about how that's going to work out and what their plans are for the Opera House. So I'm hoping that you'll tune in next week. This week, with Marty gone, I want to do a little history. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to have an interesting thing. It was the thing I went to on Sunday about Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage is one of the little known but most famous Vermonters there are. He is had an incredible thing happen to him, and I'll let you go with the story. Here's the amazing story of Phineas Gage. Hi, I'm Mike Smith. It's the 13th of September, and we're here to talk about Phineas Gage. On 13th of September, many years ago, Phineas Gage was a 26-year-old railroad man working on the railroad right about in this spot. And on that day, he made history. He changed his life forever, and he changed the understanding of how the human brain works. So this is a story of Phineas Gage and the railroad.
My name is Margo Caulfield. I'm the director of the Historical Society. I am originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I worked in trauma medicine. I worked a lot with brain injury. I have worked with patients like Phineas Gage. So this has been an interesting project for me over the years. With anything with history, what I know today could be very different by next year because we are constantly looking for new resources and new information. To begin with, 1848. Who knows what was going on in 1848? Pardon me? Gold. Gold was discovered in California. That would play into this story. Anything else going on?
Well, the Irish famine was in.
The Irish famine was in, which was very key because as a result of that, the Irish famine would result in a number of Irish people coming here and to help build the railroad in Vermont. The Irish immigrants were the main builders here. There was also Karl Marx released his big manifesto in 1848. There were a number of revolutionary wars that were going on throughout the war. Queen Victoria was on the throne. You did not have to have a license to practice medicine. But in fact, Vermont already had in 1813 the first medical society. Head injuries were very, very common. Why do you think they were so common? They were horses. You got hit in the head. You got kicked in the head by horses, gunshots, falls, that type of thing. So, played a big role. So the railroad was a huge deal. Everybody wanted a railroad because it meant you had a new way to get goods and services out. So people were very excited to have the railroad here. The Irish were camped out where we're going to be walking to, but Phineas Gage was 25 years old in absolutely peak health. He was a foreman. He was well loved by his employer and his employees, and he stayed directly across the street at what would have then been called the Adams Hotel. That house has been extremely modified. The footprint is probably very similar, but it has been extremely modified. So what it looked like when he was there and when today are two different things, but that is the location. This museum would have looked exactly as it does now, pretty much when Gage was alive. And he was here because it was built in 1834. The morning he would walk out the same path we're going to take. He would have walked out to his site of work. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, he is preparing to blast, and you will see outcrops all along where they blasted through to put the railroad through. How they did that, they would bore a hole in the rock. They would put deep into it as much as they could, the powder. Then they would put the fuse in that they're going to light it. Then they would put sand, and once the sand was in, this tamping rod would be used to tamp that in. On that particular afternoon, he turned. Why, we don't know. He looks like he may have been talking. His mouth was open. The assistant had not put the sand in, so the metal of the tamping rod hit the blasting powder. It went off. It went in under the left cheek, and it came out the top of his head. So this is a facsimile that we have of a tamping rod. It's a little shorter than his tamping rod. The tamping rod that he actually used would have been narrower and longer, and that is in the Warren Museum.
At the point was that pointy?
Yes. Oh. And which end went in first?
That one.
It would have to be, because if it had been the reverse, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It went through, came out the top, just blasted right out. Didn't stay in his head as all the pictures show, but what happened from then was that he seized. He fell back, thrown back, seized, then stopped, sat up. They put him on the back of an ox cart. He sat up the whole way. They came back the same path. They stopped there. Some of his men helped him out, sitting on the gazebo porch there. And he was alert and oriented. Dr. Williams, who was in Proctorsville, is the first doctor on the scene. Now, Dr. Williams went to what would have been called a country medical school. He went to Woodstock, to Vermont Medical College. There were several of them. There was one in Woodstock that was very short-lived. There was one at Castleton. That's where he went to school. His preference really had been to be an engineer. Unfortunately for him, he did become one. But after medical school, he went over here to Proctorsville and set up practice, but he wasn't very busy. He was out riding around. He was working on things like the Beers Atlas, following the railroad progression because he loved railroads. And fortunately for him, he ended up working in the railroad industry. So he knew Gage, and he knew the workers. The workers told him what happened. He comes immediately here. When he sees Gage, he is obviously struck by the fact there's this divot. It's like a funnel. He can see the brain. So he knows this is pretty bad. He gets him upstairs. Dr. Harlow shows up around 6 o'clock. Harlow is a completely different physician. Also very young, but extraordinarily absolutely phenomenally trained for his day and age. And we'll talk more about that when we get down there. Together, they take care of him. They try to strap this up. Remember, we all talk about the brain, the fact that this rod has gone through his head. But what we also forget is that he had really bad burns. He had burns on his face, on his arms. He was badly burned. So all of that had to be taken care of. They put him to bed sitting up. They have attendants there, the workmen, whatever. They're keeping an eye on him. And what is very sad about this is he is throwing up, and when he throws up, her brain matter comes out. So it's pretty grisly. Harlow knows enough, and he wants to get all the particulate out of the brain, and he literally at one point starts at the top of the brain where the opening is and connects up like that to really check. So You know, how much damage was done to his brain, we will never know. The most recent studies, and there have been a number of studies done that show that it was far more extensive than anybody realized. So I'm going to show you a neat way to think about his brain and what happened to it, and it's a good way to remember for brain injury, and it's stuff I use when I'm working with kids. So this part is your spinal column. Messages are going up and down from your body to your brain. This is the base of the brain. Some people like to call it the reptilian part of the brain. This is what keeps you breathing. If you really damage that, ball game over. In here, nicely tucked in, is the amygdala. The amygdala is fight, flight, anger, rage, hunger, that type of thing. Sometimes with the kids, I call this the barking dog. Over top is your cerebral cortex. This I call the wise old owl. It helps to control what's underneath here. In Gage's case, he injured the left frontal lobe of his brain, definitely exposing the amygdala. And I can tell you from working with patients like this, anger and rage is really common. There's a whole list in the handouts of the kinds of behaviors that you see. Does it alter behavior for life? Absolutely, you betcha. When I would go to work with an outpatient brain injury, you'd come in and you didn't know if the telephone would be pulled off the wall or what you were going to see. You just didn't know, and it could really vary depending on what was damaged in the brain. At that time, there were two schools of thought. Whole brain theory said, oh, you can damage part of the brain and the other part of the brain will take over and take care of everything. The other was phrenology. How many of you heard of phrenology? Yeah, many people know about phrenology because, you know, that was a sideshow attraction. You know, let me feel your head and I can tell you if you are a good person or a bad person, if you're going to be lucky in love and all kinds of stuff. And believe it or not, that stuff, that whole funny thing that you could touch, feel the head of the brain or look at the skull and get what a person was about, was literally used in courtrooms to decide somebody was innocent. And that continued right into the early 1900s. You know, it would be a sideshow attraction at carny fairs. Harlow was probably more in the phrenology camp because he quickly realized that one part of the brain was hurt and it really changed behavior. And he was absolutely right, it did. In his case, what happens is that as the days progress, not surprisingly, Phineas Gage develops infection. Now, he would not have used the word infection. Germ theory was something that didn't come really until the late to the 1800s. But Harlow had been trained in something called aseptic technique. He would have known to wash his hands. He would have presented cleanly to him because this is what would have been taught to him in medical school. He absolutely recognizes and had been trained how to treat severe head injury like this. So he understood that there was pus, and we have to get the pus out of there. By the time he is showing this, he is comatose, he is very, very ill. And his family has been called, and they absolutely go, okay, this is it. And they're saying to Harlow, don't do anything, let him go, this is it. The coffin maker was right behind this church. There was a carpenter shop. That's where the coffin was made, clothes selected. They were ready. But Harlow saves the day. And Harlow didn't think he was going to live. He said around day 10, he's like, you know, this guy might actually live. And he does, after about 10 weeks here of being recovery, and the recovery was challenging for sure. And I think he made Harlow crazy because Harlow tried to go away for whatever. And he comes back after having said, you know, do not go out, do not do this, do not. And of course, Phineas Gage had done what he wanted to do and was now sick again. But he goes back to Lebanon, New Hampshire with his family. And his parents, his mother particularly, says in February of that year, 1849, he's pretty weak, pretty frail. Now, years ago, we had a family that came that were related to the Gages. Gage did not marry to any of our knowledge, nor had any offspring to our knowledge. But this particular family would be distant cousins. And they shared a common great-great-great-grandfather. And she said within the family there were letters that the mother had written to other family members saying it was really hard to take care of Gage. Would they mind coming and helping her out? Could she help? And they, of course, were farming families, and they were not able to help. So he was impacted physically. He was impacted mentally. He tried to go back and work on the railroad. He could not work on the railroad. His personality had really changed. And as they said, he was no longer Gage, the man that they knew. He ultimately has to find a job. You can't be a 26-year-old male and not have work. He exhibits himself as a curiosity, and we had heard about this for years, and it would take Dr. Bont, who was a physician here in Cavendish. Some of you may have known Dr. Bont, and he was actually down in Lowell, Mass. His wife was taking a weaving course, and he was going through the catalog, the pictures that they had in a gift shop at the Lowell Museum, and he discovered this poster, and we blew it up so you can actually see it. And it shows that he in fact did, and when you read it, you know, it would be like, you know, you get to look at my brain pulse, and you get to see the rod that went through my head, and, you know, this type of thing. Harlow presents this by the end of 48. He puts this in what today we would call the New England Journal of Medicine, and people were just really skeptical about this. There was a physician by the name of John Bigelow. Bigelow was a well-respected and internationally known physician at Harvard, and he was known because in 1846 he had published a paper that said you can use ether to anesthetize patients. So he had a lot of cachet. So Bigelow got interested in this. They bring Gage down to Harvard. He decides he's a whole brain guy. He figures, boy, he's physically repaired. You know, he looks great. But if you look at the picture, this is Phineas Gage's skull. You can see this never closed. Today, how that would be treated, you would absolutely put a plate on there of some sort to really close that up. The same here. So he always had these, that was the rest of his life that was there. The pictures of him, there's a picture on the orange one, on your orange handout. You can see he was a very handsome man. He was blind in one eye. Harlow never lost fact of who and truly what had happened to Gage. He absolutely knew that his personality had been changed and that he was really compromised because of this injury. Harlow, God love him, tracked this man down to the ends of the earth because besides exhibiting himself as a curiosity, he works at the Hanover Inn. Everybody know where the Hanover Inn is? He's a stagecoach driver. He's caring for animals. And then his family decides, let's go to San Francisco. So how do you think they were going to get out to San Francisco? Because Continental Railroad wasn't in place. They went to Boston, they got on a ship, and I can't even begin to imagine how hard that must have been for him. But he experienced incredible seasickness. They sail around the Horn. He gets off in Santiago. He's going to work, he works as a stagecoach driver. His family goes up to San Francisco. They are going to take advantage of the gold rush, and so they camp there. For the next approximately 7 years, Gage is in Santiago. We really don't know what happened there, and I have met with reporters from Santiago. They have come here. There was one guy that has written a book about it, a fictional book. He absolutely said that Santiago Valparaiso, these were the Wild West on steroids. This was the first port of call before you, after you rounded the Horn, and it was your last port of call before you went the other direction. So it was no holds barred, crazy town. You know, they're forever writing to the U.S. government, please curb your soldiers. He just said it was worse than the Wild West. Everything you've heard about it was out of control. So Gage's behavior could be out of control, but it may not have looked too bad down there. We don't know what happened there. It's pretty clear he started having real problems, so he comes back. He goes to his family in San Francisco. And his mother, when Harlow finally tracks her down and talks to her, she says, you know, she implies that it was this life that he led. Now, what was that life? We don't know. We know he drove a stagecoach, he took care of animals. There are a few interviews here or there. We don't know what happened. Was he living on the streets? Did he start having seizures? People were afraid of anyone that would have had epilepsy. That would have really frightened them. Epilepsy is an extraordinarily common, very common if you've had a severe head injury like that. In fact, one of the things, besides giving massive antibiotics and putting plates and all of that kind of thing that they would do today, when he would have been discharged, he would have been given anti-seizure medication because it's such a common complication.
What causes a seizure in a case like this? Is it like a lack of blood or in a certain part?
I think the brain is damaged, and it would have to be a whole discussion about epilepsy, which we don't have time for now. But the bottom line is that he comes back. He tells these fantastical stories to his nieces and nephews. His personality is still very altered into what they knew of their son and brother. He ultimately ends up starting to have what we would call grand mal seizures. He starts working again. He really had an amazing work ethic. He's again working for farmers, but he's always leaving and changing jobs. And eventually he just has a series of seizures and he dies. Where he was buried, this is so sad, poor Phineas Gage. Harlow does find out where the mother is. He talks to the mother, gets in contact with her. They do exhume the body. They give Harlow the skull and the tamping rod, which he brings back, and he does a presentation for the Massachusetts Medical Society, which was a bit of, see, I told you so, I told you so, see, here's the rod, matches, see, got it. He writes one more paper, and he really talks a lot about what has happened to Gage. And he, I think Harlow must have had the most amazing bedside manner to convince the family to exhume the grave and remove the skull. That's huge. What is fascinating is in 1885, because of all the notification that Harlow and with the help of Bigelow have brought to this case, in 1885, there is a woman who is exhibiting very similar symptoms to what Harlow described of Gage. And because of that, they were able to go in, cut open, and remove the tumor, and the woman survived. So that was sort of the first case of brain injury or brain surgery. But this also opened this was the beginning of really understanding that the parts of the brain played a role in behavior and so forth. It wasn't long after that you have Broca and the Broca part of the brain, and you start seeing this really change. But it ushered in the real understanding in the field of neuroscience. And my favorite part of this story is, well, how did he become as functional as he became? And that we can really look to another member of the Gage family. He would be a distant cousin many times removed. His name is Rusty Gage, and he is considered the father of neuroplasticity. That is, your brain constantly is providing you with new neurons. When you get the new neurons, if there's something new for them to do and grasp onto, they can wire together. This is what's being used in Alzheimer's research, TBI research, stroke research, and Rusty is at the forefront of that. I have talked to Rusty. He's a wonderful guy. He's at the Salk Institute. He's another one of those people I want to have come and talk someday, and I said to him, do you think this is what happened? Do you think it was neuroplasticity that really helped him? And he thought very much so, and I would tend to agree with that, because he was constantly exposing himself to new things and new challenges. He's in Valparaiso. Many different languages are being spoken. It wasn't just English and Spanish. It was Portuguese. It was because it was a protocol from all over the world. Many different languages, many foods. But he was constantly exposing himself to new experiences which would help those latch on and to wire together. So any questions?
And that's the story of Phineas Gage, the 26-year-old railroad man who had a camping rod blasted through his head. He lived on. He had to make do for himself, but he did sort of led the way and helped us out in understanding how our brain works, and sort of led the way in neuroplasticity. So that's it for today. See you later.